Im's destruction of Lulusia Kingdom is exactly the same imagery as Enel destroying Skypiea with the Rygo, which has drawn a lot of attention to the parallels between the two. And this is really absolutely nothing new, as literally the entire series has been leading up to the reveal that the One Piece world is ruled by a god, Im, exactly identical to the god that ruled the White Sea in Skypiea. As I've explained at length in multiple videos in the past, that Skypiea is literally the entire story of One Piece beat by beat in miniature. But specifically with regards to Im and Enel, it's not even so much that Im is Enel 2.0, rather Im is clearly the original concept, the final villain of One Piece that was always planned, and Enel was the prototype version that Oda dropped early into the story as a simple concept to build to a more thematically complex one. In fact, the full progression of the types of villains and conflicts that we have seen in One Piece from Enel to Im is an extremely layered thematic buildup that makes for a far more meaningful final villain setup than if we just had a blatant cackling evil god as the primary antagonist of One Piece in the first place. And I'll be breaking down that full progression today. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe. And if you want to support this channel, then please consider becoming a member. We just launched channel memberships, so if you're a fan of this type of content, if you want a cool badge next to your name and special emojis in chat, and access to a member-exclusive podcast, and generally want to show support for the videos I make, then you can join by hitting the button below. So that aside, to begin with, let's get this out of the way. The parallels between Enel and Im are very blatant. That's not the interesting part of this video, but let's break those down quickly anyway. Yes, the Rygo similarity is obviously very visually similar to what happens to Lulusia Kingdom, but the Rygo wasn't even the first time that we saw an instance of Enel passing judgment on who is or isn't allowed to exist. In fact, the first few times that we saw Enel exercising his powers, it was in a manner very similar to Im. Enel detected signs of dissent or rebellion, and he very literally passed God's judgment from afar, raining down destruction to eliminate those who had stepped out of line. This godlike power that both of them wield, coming down from the heavens to eliminate whoever they so choose, is a pretty clear parallel. On top of this, Im rules from the top of the world at its highest point, much like Enel talks about how God belongs in the sky, far above mere mortals. And of course, Enel literally believes himself to be a god, while Im is the leader of the celestial dragons who also literally believe themselves to be divine beings. And Oda has explicitly characterized the celestial dragons as gods, with of course Enel being the first character that Oda used to hint at Luffy being God's natural enemy, the same way that Luffy as a member of the D tribe is established to be considered the natural enemy of Im and the celestial dragons. You could even argue that Enel's priests play a very similar role to Im's Gorosei, carrying out their orders as to who needs to be eliminated, with another interesting parallel being that Enel and Im both get their first proper introductions sitting on a throne as their subordinates, the priest and the Gorosei respectively, gather before them to hear their commands. Honestly, there's a lot more that I talk about in terms of setting up the idea of God in One Piece and the various callbacks to Enel that we've gotten throughout the series in these videos, any of which you can click on above my head after this one. But the point is that the similarities between Enel and Im aren't exactly mind-blowing. This stuff has been pretty openly built up for a long time. I guess the destruction of Lulusia Kingdom is when it just became ridiculously blatant with the clear visual similarity to the Rygo, but I think we're past the point where the similarities from Im to Enel are all that interesting. Instead, what's really interesting, and where the brilliance of Oda's writing shines, is in the differences between Enel and Im, and what Oda is saying through those differences. Why did Oda start with Enel? Why even bother doing this whole Skypiea arc besides for some cool foreshadowing? How does the introduction of Enel, the god of the White Sea, as a prototype Im, make for a far more nuanced setup down the line to the reveal of the actual god of the Blue Sea? Well, Enel was, by all accounts, a complete caricature of an evil god. He is fairly one-dimensional. He's a maniacally, openly authoritarian ruler with a straightforward god complex. The way that he uses his powers is just very overtly oppressive. He has absolute control, he hears everything, he silences anyone that goes against him immediately. The entire populace of Skypiea live in absolute fear and terror and obedience to his powers, because he can make them all disappear in an instant if he so chooses. Enel isn't really that interesting of a character because he's meant to be more so a concept, a very basic concept, God as pure, omnipotent, omniscient evil, and showing us the type of society that would exist under such a being. That is what Oda showcased for us in the isolated bubble of the White Sea. Now, while that's what the White Sea was like, it would not be that interesting to just have the broader Blue Sea world of One Piece be set up in the same manner. That would be a pretty straightforward black and white setup of obvious big bad guy that needs to be defeated because he is obviously an evil god that rules the world and makes everyone sad. What's so great about the world of One Piece is the exact opposite. It's not a world that is as straightforward as it initially seems. It's not a world where the good side and the bad side is as easily identifiable as it initially appears. The beauty of the One Piece world is the process of uncovering the truth behind it, and more importantly, the progression of ideas and thematic messaging that come with that truth. After all, the core themes of One Piece center around the source of truth of morality. How much of what you believe is right and wrong is actually just based on what you are fed from sources of authority. And by extension, what is it that makes that authority a source of truth in the first place? This, of course, goes hand in hand with the themes of freedom, as the flawed nature of right and wrong being dictated by authority inherently means that the Straw Hats are right to make their own decisions and carve their own paths, because that's what it means to think freely, to always question the world, to question authority, and most importantly, to always decide for yourself what is actually right or wrong. So with these key ideas in mind, if we just obviously had an evil god like Im ruling the world openly from the start of the story like Enel was, that wouldn't make for much of an exploration of ideas. It's too black and white. Obviously this authoritarian god is bad, and pirates fighting him is good, that's why freedom is good. Boring. The brilliance of One Piece's dystopia is that the world is in fact exactly like Skypiea at its core. It is exactly the same. There is an all-powerful evil god who rules everything and controls everyone, and who silences anyone who disobeys. It is truly as horrifically bad as Skypiea, but the difference is that the people of the world simply have no idea. The people of the world have been brainwashed by authority into believing that they actually live under a just regime, an honorable democratic union of all the free nations of the world, because the people of the world do not think for themselves, they do not question authority. Therefore, they can't recognize that the world they are living in is in fact as bad as Skypiea, hence the importance of freedom. That's why the heroes of the story are pirates. They are free thinkers, and in a world where everyone just obediently follows along with whatever authority tells them, free thinkers are labeled evil pirates. That is an infinitely more interesting setup, and that's the genius of having Skypiea come first. It actually hammers in the point that it's hard to understand the truth of things, since when we first read Skypiea, we didn't understand that this society we were being shown is in fact a mirror to the exact state of the One Piece world. Oda actually showed us the truth of the world right then and there, and the following 800 chapters have been the journey to connecting the dots and realizing that the world is in fact exactly like Skypiea was, and we couldn't have realized it without the Straw Hats having made that journey towards the truth themselves. That's why it's especially interesting that Skypiea came right before Enies Lobby, as the Enies Lobby storyline was when it was first revealed to us the basic notion that, hey, the world government is actually really evil. And then from that revelation onwards, One Piece became a buildup of arc after arc of getting more pieces to fall in place as we slowly realize the complete true nature of the type of evil the world government is, and by extent, the true nature of the world of One Piece. Things in the Blue Sea aren't just bad. The Blue Sea is in fact in exactly the same nightmarish predicament that we were first shown in Skypiea. The whole world that we know is also ruled by an evil god who has everyone in the palm of his hands. And that's the key to the premise of One Piece. The importance of freedom is to understand the true nature of things. You may be led to believe that you live in a great world, a perfect society, when there is in fact tremendous injustice everywhere around you, when you are in fact being completely controlled and manipulated without your own realization. So consider this progression Oda laid out arc by arc. First, he showed us the endpoint, the truth of the world, Skypiea. But at the time, we have no context as to why that's important, because we ourselves are oblivious. All we take away from the Skypiea arc is, okay, That place was really fucked up. There was an all-powerful authoritarian god that controlled everyone, and it was basically the worst society imaginable. Cool. Seems pretty bad. Then we get back to the Blue Sea, where we get countless arcs with a certain recurring theme. The idea that a truly evil ruling power would go to great lengths to hide its evil and repress voices of dissent while trying to make everyone believe that life is wonderful on the surface. This is of course first what we see with the world government, and how everyone believes the world government can do no wrong, when in fact it is responsible for numerous atrocities that it erases from history. We see this with Goa Kingdom, where the poor and the suffering are forced outside the city borders to live as trash, thereby giving the illusion that the Kingdom of Goa is one happy utopia, with those outside the borders ultimately burned alive to be erased from its history. We see this is the case with Dressrosa, with Doflamingo, who very explicitly, word for word, like the world government, created a nation of bright lights and long shadows, where everyone who obeys is happy, and everyone who disobeys is treated like trash, hidden away, or even erased from memory. We see this is the case even recently with Wano, as Orochi aims to make the flower capital appear like a joyous paradise, what he views as heaven, where everyone that lives within the capital is prosperous, while everyone outside suffers through hell. And Orochi even attempts to erase the image of suffering through the use of smile fruits to continue the illusion of a happy Wano. Basically, everywhere you look in the One Piece world, we're repeatedly shown instances of a bright society on the outside, while there is in fact evil under the surface. And as we approach the reveal of Im, Oda then begins to connect ideas back to Skypiea, particularly in the Dressrosa arc. In Dressrosa, for so long, Doflamingo played the role of a beloved king. But at the climax, Doflamingo completely goes mask off and reveals, you know what? All this time, he did in fact control everyone. He did in fact make anyone who disobeyed him disappear. He will happily wipe everyone off the face of the planet if he so chooses. Look at that. All this time, the kind king Doflamingo was in fact the mirror image of the evil god back in Skypiea, and Doflamingo ruled in exactly the same way. It's just that the people couldn't see it, because a true dystopia seems like a utopia on the outside, but is in fact as nightmarish as Skypiea underneath. And again, that is why freedom is so important. That is why someone who lives freely and thinks freely like Luffy is the protagonist of the story. And if Doflamingo is the evolution of Enel, then Im is the evolution of Doflamingo. Everything Enel was to Skypiea, Doflamingo was to Dressrosa, just with a layer of deceit on top. And everything Doflamingo was to Dressrosa, it turns out Im is to the entire world. Again, this is all fairly blatant. Doflamingo is a celestial dragon. The celestial dragons are like gods. Doflamingo rules Dressrosa like a god. The world government rules the world, and the world government itself is like God. Doflamingo makes Dressrosa seem like a utopia to its citizens when in fact it has great evils hidden underneath. The world government seems like a just regime to its citizens when in fact it has great evils hidden underneath. And the head of the world government, the puppet master behind it all, is Im, and now that the time has come for a great cleansing, it appears that we are at a point where Im is about to go mask off the same way that Doflamingo did. We are approaching a point where the illusion of the world government as a just regime is going to fall apart, and the true nature of the world is being revealed to be exactly the same as the setup that we were first shown in Skypiea. The reality is everyone is under God's thumb, at his mercy. What an amazing evolution of ideas across such a long epic. I am extremely excited to see how this all comes to a head in the final saga of One Piece, and of course if you enjoyed this video then definitely like, subscribe, and consider supporting me by becoming a member if you enjoy this type of content and want to see more in the future. Big shout out to everyone that has already joined.